Hey everybody! Today I'm going to do a tutorial on a painted embossing folder technique, but I also want to give you a little tip about creating little sentiment strips for your cards, which is something I really like to do, and I did on this card. I tend to cut my cards to the exact same size, which is 4 by 5 1/4, and so I'm left with these awesome 1/2 inch strips of cardstock that are sized all exactly the same width. And I love to use these for sentiment strips for the front of my cards. And I use them in my classes because that way I'm not wasting that extra cardstock. Now today I have embossed this piece of Pacific Point cardstock with our beautiful 6x6 embossing folder with what you can either interpret as birch trees or aspen trees, depending on where you live. I love the aspens in the desert Southwest. And that's what these look like to me. What I'm going to do with this embossed piece of cardstock is just use my finger and my Whisper White ink pad to apply ink to the raised areas of the trees. Now don't worry too much. Don't worry if you get a little bit of white ink in the background. It doesn't matter. This is sort of a painterly scene and it doesn't need to be perfect at all. Nothing needs to be perfect. You know what I'm going to say. Perfection is for serial killers. We're not serial killers, we're crafters. So once I have that all coated, I'm going to start the painting process for this piece of cardstock. I'm taking a little bit of Whisper White re-inker, putting it in the lid of my ink pad, and I'm going to use the blender pen to apply ink just to one side of each of these trees. I'm going to add what is going to look like a little bit of light or highlight to one side. And this will sort of increase the dimensionality of this image in the background and just add a touch of realism. I think embossing folders and the art on embossing folders are sort of underappreciated. I'm amazed that the people who design these folders can design in 3 dimensions. That is not one of my gifts whatsoever. I am a 2-dimensional person. I found this out in college when I was in a sculpture class that I failed miserably at. And I really had a terrible teacher for that sculpture class as well. We did a drawing portion in one of these classes, and I did a piece of art that I'm the most proud of any piece of art I've ever done in my life. It was a pen and ink stippling, and I did it of a sleeve of a shirt, and it was huge. I worked on it forever, and he actually stole that piece from me, and I didn't appreciate that one bit. Thomas, you know who you are. And that, plus my inability to do 3-dimensional sculptures, sort of left a bad taste about 3D in general in my mouth. And so I've stuck with 2D since then. So my hat is off to all embossing folder designers. And the purpose of this project today is to give those people the respect they deserve by treating an embossing folder much like we would treat a stamp. So we're normally painting and enhancing our stamp images. Well, I think we should paint and enhance our embossing folders too. Because someone, somewhere, worked really hard on these beautiful trees. And I'm going to do my best to make them look as beautiful as they can. So now you can see that just adding that little bit of highlight to the sort of generic white that I added in the beginning makes a big difference in how 3-dimensional they look. But we have one more step to go. I am taking the same color ink as my cardstock, which is Pacific Point, and I am going to add shadows on the opposite side from the side where I added the light. I'm using my blender pen again, And just remember that when you're using a blender pen, it's actually putting that glycerin solution down on your cardstock, which can give you the illusion that you're adding color when you're not, because it's just wetting the cardstock and making it look darker. But you will need to go back several times and pick up dark ink to fill in these areas that you thought you were coloring in when you were actually out of ink. So you'll see me add a little extra re-inker to the ink pad lid just to get a deep dark blue on that side. This really enhances the look of a painting that I want to give to this background. So the darker you can get, the better. Don't be afraid of a super dark line. At first, I was afraid that it was too dark, but then it lightens up as it dries. And also that dramatic dark effect is really pretty against the white. Everything here is sort of soft looking because of that white craft ink, and a little bit of high contrast really looks good. Now, in addition just to going down the side of the tree, I'm also going into those little notches on the birch or aspen bark, because those would look dark to just your eye if you were out in the forest. And I want to make sure I add shading there too. Also underneath the branches where there would be natural shadow. And you'll see I go over this several times to get the look that I want. Oh, I just love this. I love it. I hope you love it. It's pretty. Now I've taken my little sentiment strip and I just want to color this little cardinal. The cardinal is actually from White Christmas. And there are 2 cardinals in this set, and they face opposite ways, which is super handy when you're doing something like this. So I'm just going to clean both ends of my blender pen, just because I'm on camera. Normally I don't clean anything, but you're watching me. I feel all this pressure. And I'm coloring this little guy with real red. And it takes like 2 seconds because he is so tiny. And I chose the one that would be facing into my sentiment. He would also be super cute sitting on one of the letters. But here we go. I didn't even have to cut that thing since it was a leftover. And there it is sitting on top of this beautiful painted embossing folder background with a little fun piece of recycled cardstock. And I hope that that makes you feel cool wherever you are, because it's very hot here. Hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Thanks so much for watching.